Hello and welcome to the IDEM Interactions. The IDEM Interactions is today with an international guest, a specialist on India and Indian affairs, all the way from Paris, Philippe Humbert of Georges Jurek Foundation.
Yes.
Welcome, Philippe,
Thank
to
you.
the IDEM Interactions. Of course, we know that you have been interacting with India right from the 1980s. Perhaps you know more about India than many Indians do.
Don't think so.
And you also wrote this interesting book in 1992, which got published in 1992, the Rajiv Gandhi years.
Yes.
So you are a special focus on the Congress party because that was the ruling party at that point of time.
Yes.
Of course, now we have a lot of things happening. The situation in India has changed, and you were coming to India after 4 years after the COVID period. So, when you compare the visits that you have heard in the past, or can you compare the situation in the 1980s and 1990s and the new millennia? What are the big changes that you see in India?
From a political internal viewpoint, I think that the situation where the Congress was a big party, things were different. Congress used to have a more diversified base, I think.
Diversified base.
More diversified base.
Yes, yeah.
And it was more like a coalition of parties or segment of the population. Now I think when the BJP took over in 2014, I think it is acting as a big machinery. It's a big bloc, a very strong machinery.
Yeah.
And I think with a strong local organization and central organization, more than when the Congress was at power.
Yeah, in your book, you talk about how the Congress built a coalition of various segments of society. We call them castes and communities here.
Yeah.
But the BJP is pursuing what is called a Hindutva philosophy. But within the Hindutva philosophy, it has made some major inroads in unifying large sections of the Hindu society.
Yeah.
How do you look at that phenomenon?
I think this phenomenon is something new in India, according to my viewpoint, because it is a shift toward a society where there is a kind of monolithic views under Hinduism.
Okay.
It's a bit surprising seeing that India is not an Hindu country. There are Hinduism, of course, but with a big segment of Muslim, Christians, Sikh, or Jain. Well, it's a more diversified. So shifting policy towards a Hindu bloc is something which is a bit odd in my views, and it relates to some experience in some other countries where there is a bloc according to, I would not say religious belief, but that is strongly cultural custom and habits.
Okay, but when you say that it is like similar to some other countries, can you name which are the other countries that?
For instance, Israel. In Israel.
Pardon me?
In Israel.
Israel, yeah.
Israel.
Yeah.
There is a tendency to the same way. I think Israel being considered as a Jewish country, 100%, which is not true, because there in Israel there is a very strong Arab minorities.
Yeah.
Even there are citizens.
Right.
So it can't be a Jewish state. No.
Okay.
Even if some people would like to come. So it's this kind of movement. Of course, the size of India is much bigger.
Right.
So that's something new, according to me.
Something new, and perhaps something that is taking us more towards a sectarian state. I mean, a state which is kind of, pushing a sectarian agenda.
Yes, I think that this view is, in a way, against secularism. Because secularism means that the state has not any religious image, or, secularism stands for kind of separation of the state, government, and religion. It's what done in France is
Yeah,
famous
of course, we all know that
1905.
we all know that France is the place where secularism, the concept of secularism, originated.
Yes.
And also, interestingly, two judges of the Supreme Court said that that religion and politics should not be mixed. I mean,
Yeah.
So it's something that that echoes what you're saying. But would you like to comment on something like that? The Supreme Court.
Yes, I think secularism is something. In France, it was built over centuries, because for centuries, the king was supposed to represent God in France for centuries.
Okay.
After, for another century, the last one, the Catholic Church of France had been struggling to not to rule the state, but to have a strong influence over the state government in many things, for schooling, for many things, until the famous law 1905 in France, 1905, which had been the secularism law, what called laïcité in France.
Right.
This law is still there.
Yeah.
It is the base of laïcité.
But there were demands to look at the reform of the secular idea of the secularism idea of France, especially in the context of the hijab and all that came up in the 90s and early 2000s.
Yes, there are some views like that, but my feel, and it's reality now, this law, the 1905 law, has not to be changed. It has not been changed at all. The only thing that its implementation in some areas, mainly in schools and in some public domain areas like administration, can be, in a way, a bit pragmatic, in a way, according to local circumstances. But the law has not been changed. I don't think it will be changed.
Do you think it should not be changed?
It should not be changed, because this law provides for some basic freedom of conscience, freedom of religious, freedom of performing your religion, freedom of not to tell some people to do something.
Right.
So it's very basic. In a way, it's very simple. As principle, it's very simple. Of course, sometimes the implementation can be a bit complicated, but I think it should not be changed. And there is no real attempt to change the law, except
even when you say that, one also sees that the far right in France is growing in strength from election to election, and they're getting more and more seats in parliament. They're having higher share of votes. So ultimately, I think perhaps France is also heading towards India kind of situation.
Well, it's true that the far right is increasing. They have currently about 80 to 90 MPs, which is a big number, the biggest ever. And there is a trend, but we'll see in the future. It's very difficult to say that in some years things will be as some people would like it to be, because just imagine 4 years ago, it was before COVID, before the Ukrainian war, so the world was different.
Right.
So in 4 years ahead, well, we'll see, but we have
I
to
think
fight.
Across Europe, migration is a major issue. If you look at France's history, France was a country which kind of promoted migration, especially from African countries like Tunisia.
Yes.
But I think there is a public sentiment against it growing in France as well. How do you account for something like that?
Yes, it's true that there is a migration pressure coming from the south, mainly coming from African countries, and also from countries which are involved in wars, like Afghanistan, Syria, and now Ukrainian, but in very different contexts. So it's true there is a kind of pressure, but we have to build up a regime where we can welcome those people who are willing to settle down and to be integrated, and that has to be done. But there is a kind of quantum which is possible, and sometimes in some occasions there are some situations which are difficult to tackle.
Right, right. Anyway, let's come back to India because
Yes,
I think
yes,
we
India,
started
yes,
talking
after
about
all,
France
yes.
more than about
Yeah,
India.
exactly.
See, the point is, I remember some of your writings when you said that the India story. I mean, especially we've been following it since the mid 1980s. India's story is about economic growth. That is something which you have consistently held.
Yeah.
So, when you come back again, the same question about the political situation that I asked you, I want to repeat it. What is the kind of economic growth situation that you see in India at this point of time?
Well, I think the economic growth in India for this current year is supposed to be around 6%, which is a relatively high number compared to the world. In many countries it's much less. Even China is less for the moment. So this is a nominal number, of course, with situation is much more diversified. There are strong points in Indian economy. I would say, of course, all those companies like Infosys, Wipro, all the services, all what is related to energy, renewable energy, is doing quite well. Solar energy, which was my field in the last year in India, doing very well. I think in aeronautics, civil aviation, booming. And there are some strong points, which are very similar with the one about 5 or 10 years ago, except that semiconductors, electronic industry is booming, and of course the telecommunication world I was belonging to have totally changed. Technology is totally new now, and you know that, and India is performing in this field. But also, what is not new is that some basic problems in India are not solved. Right? First, mass education. I think India should have a mass education prospect, and which had been done in China. And if China is at such a level that because they have performed mass education and mass social amenities, I think in India you have a very high level. The IIT, the famous IIT, and many private universities are doing extremely well, but still in the country,
the mass education, there's to be some focus.
Yeah.
But in terms of primary and secondary education, there are states like Kerala which have done very well.
Yes. So that demonstrates that it's possible. It's just a matter of will. And I say that we underestimate the fact that in the states, India, you have a center, but you have a state. Kerala is doing well. Why not Tamil Nadu? Tamil Nadu is doing pretty well also.
Yeah.
Why other states are not doing as well? So it's a matter of concern, of responsibilities of the local authorities of those states, which are not dedicated enough in some cases.
Right. And you talked about the growth in the aviation industry, and
yes.
France and India has an aviation connection. In the Rafale deal. How do you look at that connection?
But it's not new. It's not new at all. You must remember that Dassault airplanes have been introduced in India in the 50s.
Okay.
And many of the pilots trained. Even not now, they are aging, but they have been trained on some planes coming from Dassault at that time. So it's a very old story. A relationship in aviation. Then it came to new kind of airplane. The last one is the Rafale. So I know India has selected the Rafale, but it's true also for civil aviation. Okay. And very recently, Air India has ordered. It was the biggest order in the world, 500 airplanes, coming from about 50% Airbus, 50% Boeing. So it shows that civil aviation is booming in India. A lot of airports are being expanded, so we can see that in Delhi in many places.
Apart from aviation, the other area that India and France had a huge collaboration was on the Solar Alliance.
Yes.
What is the future of that now?
Well, I am I would say, extremely dedicated to solar industry because I've been in India the last 5, 6 years, working in India itself, expanding solar plants with a French company, which was there as a pioneer. I mean, it was in 2015, and you remember at the COP15 in Paris, it was where this solar alliance, international solar alliance, has been created with the French government and with your government, and now implemented in Delhi. So I am a strong believer of about solar energy and more generally renewable energy with wind.
But is India doing well in the renewable section?
Yeah. I think India is doing quite well for renewable energy. To see the numbers, the number of gigawatts which are installed at the capacity is huge.
Right.
It's huge. So India, I think it's a good move. I must say that it's a good example of what has to be done in many countries. Solar energy and wind energy, and more generally, renewable energy.
That's very good. India has now got the chairmanship of the G20 now.
Yeah.
So how do you think it is going to impact India's global standing as well as especially relationship with countries like France?
This is new. I think India is more assertive in the world affairs. For a long time, India was a bit idle, very shy. Not visible on the planet, in spite of its population. Now I think things are different. India is much more assertive because of its weight. It's maybe the number 5 as an economic power. So you can't hide yourself in the planet. You have to play a role.
Absolutely.
G20 is a good opportunity for that. Although with the Ukrainian war and the rift between we said the so-called West and the so-called Russia-China bloc, makes things quite difficult for India monitoring the G20. It was seen at the last meeting, and where there were the finance minister meetings here. I think it was in Delhi. And they could not sign a joint community because of those two, the opposition between those. So the Ukrainian war makes things difficult for India for monitoring G20. I think September meeting will be difficult also. Maybe the same will happen.
I think apart from the differences in terms of the Russia-Ukraine war, the other thing that was kind of flagged was the human rights situation in this country. And I think the Indian foreign minister kind of asserted that that you cannot have a universal standards for gauging human rights. Each country has got to have its own different. But coming to that point, I think in the Rajiv Gandhi years, you kind of you have asserted how Rajiv Gandhi's political perspectives were essentially guided by democratic values. But now you have a situation where his son and the Congress leader, former Congress President Rahul Gandhi, has been divested of his parliamentary membership. So how do you look at this comparison?
Well, I think this is happening in India, but in many places. You can see that in the world now, how things are done in a very pragmatic way. Just imagine this new alliance in the Middle East between countries like between Israel and its neighbors, for instance, the famous Abraham's agreement. All in spite of the background, more and more nations are doing in a very pragmatic way. In a way, it's good, but in another way, it's against the universal views of rights.
Thank you, Philip Humbert, for your perspectives. Despite your long tradition as a secularist, as long tradition as a socialist, somebody who believes in social democracy, I can see that at the end of it all, what you are seeing globally is not a very bright picture, but almost a bleak one. But then let's hope for better times, and I wish you have a very good time in India as the kind of times that you used to have earlier, and we will
Thank you.
meet in future as well in item interactions.
Thank you very much.